At exactly 3:17 hours on April 20th, 2026, in the ink-black waters of the Gulf of Oman, a guided missile destroyer broke hard to starboard and accelerated to flank speed. The USS Spruance, an Arleigh Burke-class Aegis warship, had been shadowing a specific green blip on its SPY-1D radar array for 11 hours. The blip belonged to the MV Tuska, an Iranian-flagged cargo vessel. And in the next 17 minutes, what unfolded on that ship's rain-slicked deck would send shockwaves through every naval command center from Bahrain to Beijing. This was not a random inspection. This was the culmination of a 56-day war that had already consumed the Middle East, shattered the Strait of Hormuz, and brought 3 American carrier strike groups into the same body of water for the first time since Operation Iraqi Freedom. The world's most volatile naval chessboard had just produced its most dangerous move yet. Let's go back to the beginning, because to understand what happened on the Tuska, you have to understand what Operation Epic Fury actually unleashed. Operation Epic Fury, the trigger. At precisely 200 hours on February 28, 2026, the most precisely orchestrated airstrike in modern military history began. U.S. and Israeli forces, operating under months of coordinated strategic deception, including falsified satellite imagery of airfields, deliberately emptied parking lots, and warplanes that appeared unloaded on overhead sensors, launched simultaneous multi-axis kinetic strikes against Iranian military infrastructure. IDF spokesperson Brigadier General Defrin later confirmed that he and IDF Chief of Staff Lieutenant General Ayal Zamir had driven their official vehicles home the night before, specifically to make Iranian satellite surveillance believe headquarters was at minimal readiness. Within half a minute, 3 separate gatherings of Iranian regime leadership were struck. Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei was assassinated in the opening salvo. By March 1st, Iranian state media had confirmed it. The IRGC-controlled Fars news agency announced that Khamenei's daughter, son-in-law, and grandchild had also been killed in the strike. The head of the Islamic Republic, the man who had been the fulcrum of Iranian strategic doctrine for over 3 decades, was gone. Iran's response was immediate, furious, and multi-directional. Hundreds of ballistic missiles and thousands of drones were launched simultaneously at Israel, at U.S. military installations in Bahrain, Jordan, Kuwait, Qatar, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE, and at oil infrastructure throughout the Persian Gulf. Hezbollah launched rockets into northern Israel from Lebanese territory. A drone struck the British Akrotiri airbase on Cyprus. Iranian missiles were intercepted over Turkish airspace, prompting NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte to invoke Article 5 of the Alliance Charter. Within 72 hours, the Strait of Hormuz, the narrow choke point through which 20% of the world's oil flows, was effectively closed. 13 U.S. service members were killed in the first weeks of fighting. 6 died in a single Iranian drone strike at Port Shuaibah in Kuwait on March 1st. Among them, Major Jeffrey O'Brien, age 45, and Chief Warrant Officer 3 Robert Marzan, 54. Their deaths were not statistics. They were the human cost of what Washington now called the most critical regional military operation since 2003. By April 7th, after 37 days of combat, a fragile 2-week ceasefire had been brokered. But on April 13th, just 6 days after that ceasefire, the U.S. Navy began imposing a naval blockade, preventing any ship that had docked at Iranian ports from transiting the Strait of Hormuz. The ceasefire was holding in name only. What was coming next would make it irrelevant. The stage: 3 carrier strike groups. By the 3rd week of April, the U.S. Navy had assembled a naval force of historic proportions in the waters between Oman and the Persian Gulf. 3 aircraft carrier strike groups now operated in the same theater simultaneously. The USS Gerald R. Ford, CVN-78, with its air wing of 75 aircraft, including F/A-18 Super Hornets, EA-18G Growler electronic attack aircraft, and E-2D Advanced Hawkeyes for battle management. The USS Harry S. Truman, CVN-75, repositioned from the Mediterranean, its VLS cells loaded with Tomahawk Block 5 land attack cruise missiles capable of mid-flight target updates. And now, arriving within the final 72 hours before the Tuska incident, the USS George H.W. Bush, CVN-77, announced by CENTCOM on April 20th. 3 nuclear-powered floating airfields, approximately 225 aircraft operating in the same tactical airspace, a combined surface escort of more than 20 Aegis-equipped destroyers and cruisers. The firepower assembled in those waters exceeded the combined air and naval strength of all but 4 nations on Earth. Iran's IRGC Aerospace Force had already claimed, though without providing location data, to have struck the USS Tripoli, the LHA-7 amphibious assault ship, forcing it to retreat into the southern Indian Ocean. U.S. Navy officials neither confirmed nor denied the claim, but satellite imagery from commercial providers showed the Tripoli was no longer on its previously tracked heading. The psychological dimension of the war was as real as the kinetic one, and it was into this cauldron of maximum pressure naval dominance that the MV Tuska chose to make its move. The Tuska, 7 seconds. At 03:06 hours, the Spruance's Combat Information Center received a tasked intelligence package via the Link 16 Tactical Data Network from an E-2D Hawkeye orbiting at 25,000 feet, approximately 90 nautical miles to the southwest. The package flagged the Tuska as a vessel of interest. It had departed an Iranian port, specifically violating the terms of the blockade order, and its AIS positioning data had gone intermittent over the previous 4 hours. The behavior pattern was consistent with a vessel attempting to spoof its position while using the commercial shipping lanes as cover to break through the cordon.
The Spruance closed to within 3 nautical miles. Its long-range acoustic device, the LRAD system, broadcast a warning in Farsi and in English across the international hailing frequency. Iranian vessel Tuska, you are operating in violation of standing U.S. naval orders. Heave to immediately and prepare to be boarded. Any resistance will be met with lethal force. The Tuska did not stop. Its engines maintained speed. At 03:17 hours and 42 seconds, the Spruance's forward 5-inch Mark 45 naval gun fired a ranging shot across the vessel's bow, close enough for the acoustic shockwave to rattle the bridge windows. At 03:17 hours and 49 seconds, a second shot. 7 seconds between the 2 rounds. The Tuska's engines cut. What followed was captured on video and released by President Trump himself. 2 MH-60 Seahawk helicopters came in low and fast from the Spruance's flight deck. Marine Raiders, operators from Marine Raider Regiment, MARSOC, fast-roped onto the Tuska's deck while a 3rd helo circled in an overwatch pattern. Within 4 minutes, the vessel was secured. Crew members were detained and segregated. The cargo hold was opened. What was inside that hold? U.S. officials have declined to specify in detail. Iran's foreign ministry condemned the seizure as an act of piracy and demanded the immediate release of the Iranian vessel, its sailors, crew, and their families. That language, especially the phrase, "and their families," suggested Iranian authorities expected crew members to face prosecution, not simply detention. This was not the language of a government that believed its ship was carrying innocent trade goods. Do you believe the contents of that hold justify what came next? If yes, comment 1 below. Because what the Tuska incident triggered in Tehran changed the entire diplomatic trajectory of the war. Hezbollah fires. The second front reopens. While Marine raiders were still processing the Tuska's crew in the Gulf of Oman, 1,400 miles to the northwest, a different kind of war was reigniting. On the night of April 24th,
less than 72 hours after the Trump administration extended a ceasefire agreement, Hezbollah launched a rocket salvo at the Israeli settlement of Shtula in northern Israel. The group announced it was acting in defense of Lebanon and its people, in direct response to Israeli airstrikes on the southern Lebanese town of Yatar. This was not a misunderstanding. Israeli forces had never stopped operating in southern Lebanon, even after a ceasefire between Hezbollah and Israel had theoretically been reached. CNN satellite imagery captured what happened in Bint Jebel. On April 14th, the town center showed severe damage, with gray debris patterns consistent with deliberate demolitions. By April 23rd, 9 days later, the remaining structures had been completely flattened. An Israeli ground operation had methodically razed entire city blocks, while the ceasefire was nominally in effect. The IDF confirmed a strike killed 2 people in the southern Lebanese town of Tulin on April 25th, less than 24 hours after the White House had announced a 3-week extension of the truce. Israel's Defense Minister Katz stated Israel was prepared to resume the war and awaited a green light from Washington to return Iran to the Stone Age. Netanyahu, recovering from early-stage prostate cancer treatment, was coordinating directly with the Trump White House on next steps. The ceasefire was a legal fiction wearing the face of a peace agreement. The two-front reality was now undeniable. In the south, a naval blockade and maritime seizures. In the north, Israeli ground forces and Hezbollah rockets. Iran's IRGC-controlled command structure was operating on multiple axes simultaneously, and the thread connecting them all ran through one city, Islamabad.
The Islamabad Gambit. On April 25, 2026, Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi landed in Pakistan. His stated mission? To meet with Pakistani officials and transmit Tehran's position on a peace framework through Islamabad's mediation channel. The White House announced it was dispatching Special Envoy Steve Witkoff and Senior Advisor Jared Kushner to Islamabad on the same day, signaling that indirect negotiations were live. Iran's foreign ministry promptly issued a contradictory statement. No meeting is planned to take place between Iran and the U.S. Araghchi's communications would be relayed through Pakistani intermediaries, not exchanged directly. This diplomatic ambiguity was not an accident. It was a calculated IRGC-influenced posture, designed to extract concessions without appearing to negotiate under coercion. Iran had rejected a 15-point U.S. peace framework. It had refused to show flexibility on 2 critical issues: the naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz and its enriched uranium stockpile, which intelligence assessments estimated was now sufficient, if processed further, for multiple nuclear devices. Former U.S. Ambassador Adam Morelli warned that Tehran was prepared to outlast the blockade. Iran had already generated an average of $25 million per day in additional oil revenue in March alone, as global prices spiked, selling through alternative buyers willing to absorb the geopolitical risk. Russia, which saw an estimated $150 million per day surge in its own energy revenues from the same pricing environment, had every incentive to keep that channel alive. The New START treaty had expired in February 2026. There were no bilateral nuclear arms control agreements in force between the United States and Russia. The regulatory vacuum left the 2 largest nuclear arsenals on Earth in a monitoring blackout. As USS Spruance's long-range precision strike systems maintained full operational alert postures, any miscalculation in the Persian Gulf had a theoretical nuclear escalation pathway that no formal treaty structure was designed to prevent. Trump's public messaging reflected this brinkmanship. He had stated the U.S. could neutralize any Iranian military rebuild quickly, that he was in no rush to close a deal, but also that the U.S. would not use nuclear weapons in Iran. clarifying a social media post that had been widely condemned for language suggesting he was open to the option. "Don't rush me," he said at a Thursday press conference. The phrase hung in the air over 3 aircraft carrier strike groups, a Marine Raiders team processing a seized Iranian vessel, and a foreign minister conducting shuttle diplomacy 1,400 miles away. The strategic calculus. Here is what the next 30 days will determine. Whether the Islamabad Channel produces a negotiating framework that allows both Tehran and Washington to exit this war without either side declaring defeat, or whether the blockade tightens to the point where Iran's economy forces its remaining military structure into a desperate escalatory act. One that the US and Israeli military apparatus is, by every observable metric, prepared to answer. The USS George H.W. Bush's arrival was not symbolic. 3 carrier strike groups in a single theater represent the ability to simultaneously conduct deep strike operations against hardened underground facilities, maintain continuous combat air patrol over the Strait of Hormuz, suppress Iranian air defense networks with EA-18G Growlers running electronic attack profiles, and respond within minutes to any IRGC naval swarm attack in the Persian Gulf's confined waters. The Tomahawk Block 5 missiles carried by those destroyers can reach any target in Iran without refueling. They can change targets in mid-flight. They can differentiate between a military frigate and a civilian vessel through electronic clutter. What Iran has left in its strategic toolkit, after 56 days of combat attrition, is a combination of deep strike ballistic missiles, an asymmetric drone campaign that has proven lethal to exposed U.S. surface assets, a proxy network in Lebanon and Iraq that is under intense kinetic pressure, and the closing card that no one has yet played, the mining of the Strait of Hormuz. Trump stated clearly that any vessel attempting to lay mines in the strait would be destroyed immediately. The USS Spruance's actions on April 20th were a demonstration of exactly how quickly that order would be executed. The Tuska was not just a cargo ship, it was a message. And the Marine Raiders who fast-roped onto its deck delivered the reply. The final calculus. There are no clean endings in modern warfare. The ceasefire is not peace. The blockade is not de-escalation. 3 aircraft carriers in the same water is not restraint. It is the maximum compression of force into a geographic choke point. Pressure so overwhelming that the only mathematically logical outcome is capitulation or catastrophe. What the Tuskas hold contained, what Arachi told Pakistani mediators, what the next Hezbollah salvo will target, and whether the USS George H.W. Bush's air wing will ever launch a combat sortie. Those are questions that will define the next chapter of this war. But one thing is already settled. The United States Navy has demonstrated, in 11 hours of surveillance and 7 seconds of cannon fire, that the blockade is not theoretical. It is enforced. By Aegis radar, by Marine Raiders on fast ropes, and by a guided missile destroyer that doesn't ask permission before it moves. What would you do if you were in Tehran right now? The clock is running, and the next ship that tries to run the blockade will get 7 seconds of warning, and then it will get the same answer the Tuska got. Stay sharp. Stay informed, because the decisions made in the next 30 days in that body of water will determine the price of energy, the future of nuclear non-proliferation, and whether the Middle East's next decade looks like 2003, or something the world has never seen before.